My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 28 years old, and my story is about how quickly love turns conditional when money is involved. I grew up in a wealthy household. At least, wealthy enough that we never worried about bills or groceries or rent. My father, Richard, owned a string of car dealerships across the state, and my mother, Patricia, wore her diamonds like armor. To outsiders, we looked like the perfect upper-middle-class family. But on the inside, it was a different story. For as long as I can remember, my parents used money as both leash and weapon. They paid for my tuition, my car, my rent, but every dollar came with strings attached. They decided what I studied, who I dated, even what jobs I was allowed to pursue. And if I pushed back, the threat was always the same. We'll cut you off. At first, I thought it was normal. Didn't all parents want to guide their kids? But as I grew older, I realized they weren't guiding me. They were controlling me. And the older I got, the heavier that leash became. After college, I wanted to build something of my own. I had an idea for a marketing startup, helping small businesses scale with digital tools that my father's old-school dealerships didn't even use. I believed in it. But when I mentioned it at dinner one night, my father slammed his fork down so hard the silverware rattled. A startup, he scoffed. That's code for unemployed. No daughter of mine is going to waste time on pipe dreams. My mother chimed in, her voice sharp. You have everything you need, Claire. Why risk it? You're not cut out for leadership. Their words sliced through me. I wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong. But instead, I just nodded and let the conversation die. Because I knew what would come next. And sure enough, a week later, it did. I got a call from my father's accountant. My allowance, my rent stipend, even the credit card they monitored, all canceled. Just like that, I was cut off. No warning. No conversation. Just punishment. I'll never forget the way my father put it when I confronted him. His voice was calm, almost smug, like he'd rehearsed it. You'll thank us one day, he said. This is tough love. Maybe now you'll get serious about your future instead of chasing fantasies. A fantasy. That's what he called my dream. I left that day with nothing but a few savings and the fire of humiliation burning in my chest. And maybe that was the best thing that could have happened. The first months were brutal. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a rougher part of town, the kind of place my mother would have fainted at. The carpets smelled faintly of mildew. The walls were scuffed, and the kitchen sink dripped no matter how hard I twisted the faucet. I sold my designer handbags to cover bills. I canceled every subscription I didn't need. I ate ramen more nights than I care to admit. But I also worked. I poured everything I had into my startup idea, teaching myself coding at night, pitching small businesses during the day, and designing campaigns on a beat-up laptop that overheated if I ran more than 2 apps at once. And slowly, painfully, something started to grow. My first client was a mom-and-pop bakery. They'd been struggling since a chain cafe opened nearby. I revamped their website, ran targeted ads, and created a loyalty program that brought customers back. Within 3 months, their sales doubled. The look on the owner's face when she hugged me and said, "You saved us," was the fuel I needed to keep going. Word spread. More clients came. A local florist, a small gym, a family-owned hardware store. Each win felt like proof that I wasn't crazy, that my dream wasn't a fantasy. And then came the big break. A mid-sized clothing brand hired me for a full rebranding campaign. The contract was worth more than my father ever gave me in allowance. I remember staring at the signed agreement in my inbox, tears streaming down my face. For the first time, I didn't just believe in myself, I had proof. Within a year, I had a small office downtown. Nothing glamorous, just 3 rooms above a coffee shop, but it was mine. I hired 2 assistants, interns at first, then full-time. We worked long hours, ate takeout on the floor when deadlines loomed, and celebrated wins with cheap champagne. Every day, I walked into that office and felt something my parents never gave me. Pride. And yet, despite everything, part of me still wanted them to see it. To see me. Because no matter how independent I felt, the little girl inside me still craved their approval. And maybe that's why what happened next hit so hard. One Thursday afternoon, I was reviewing campaign data when my assistant buzzed me. Claire, your parents are here, she said. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. My parents? Yes. They said they wanted to see you. Should I send them in? For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My parents hadn't visited me once since they cut me off. Not when I moved into the dingy apartment. Not when I fought tooth and nail for every client. Not when I opened this office. And now, suddenly, they were here. I swallowed hard. Yes. Send them in. The door opened and there they stood. My father in his tailored suit, my mother in her pearl necklace, both scanning the room with thinly veiled disdain. This is your office? My mother said, wrinkling her nose. It's small, my father added flatly. But I suppose it's something. Before I could respond, my assistant walked in, carrying a stack of folders. She stopped in front of my desk, her voice clear and professional. Good afternoon, CEO. Here are the reports you asked for. The word hung in the air like thunder. CEO. My parents' heads snapped toward me, their eyes wide, their smug expressions faltering. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like their dependent. I didn't feel like their failure. I felt like exactly what I was. A woman they could no longer control. For a second, the office felt frozen in time. My assistant smiled politely, placed the folders on my desk, and slipped out, leaving silence in her wake. The words she used, CEO, still rang in my parents' ears. My father's jaw was tight, his lips pressed so hard they'd gone white. My mother blinked rapidly, as though she'd misheard. CEO, my father finally said, his voice sharp. She just called you CEO. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands calmly on the desk. That's right. I run this company. It's mine. My mother scoffed, clutching her pearl necklace as though it could shield her from reality. You? Don't be ridiculous. You don't have the experience, the background. Running a company isn't something you can just do. I smiled faintly. And yet, here we are. Their disbelief was almost comical. For years, they had dismissed me, told me I wasn't cut out for leadership, cut me off because they thought I would fail. And now, faced with proof of my success, they couldn't process it. My father paced the small office, his polished shoes tapping against the floor. What exactly is this business? He demanded. Selling trinkets online? Freelance work? I gestured to the walls, lined with framed campaign posters from clients we'd rebranded. Marketing and digital strategy. My team helps businesses grow online. That bakery downtown? We doubled their sales. The boutique on 5th? We rebranded them completely. And just last month, we closed a 6-figure contract with a regional clothing brand. My father stopped pacing. His eyes flicked to the folders on my desk, then back to me. For a moment, I saw something crack through his anger. Uncertainty. My mother recovered first, sniffing in disdain. Well, anyone can pretend to be important. But how long can this last? Surely you can't keep it up. You don't have the stability of our support. I laughed softly, though my chest was tight. That's the point, Mom. I don't need your support anymore. Not financially. Not emotionally. Her face twisted, as if I'd just insulted her directly. Don't be dramatic. I'm not being dramatic, I said evenly. I'm being honest. You cut me off, remember? You said I'd thank you one day. Well, thank you. Because without that push, I never would have built this. The silence that followed was deafening. But if I thought my parents would back down, I was wrong. By the following week, they had shifted gears. My mother began calling, leaving voicemail after voicemail. Darling, we should talk. I know we've had our differences, but family is family. Maybe we could meet for dinner? I ignored the first few, wary of the sudden warmth. But curiosity, and maybe some lingering desire for approval, made me answer one call. Claire, my mother gushed. I'm so glad you picked up. Your father and I have been thinking. You've done well for yourself, clearly. But imagine what you could do with our guidance. With our network. My jaw clenched. Guidance? Or control? She hesitated just a fraction too long. We only want what's best for you. The same line they'd used my whole life. Mom, I said firmly, What's best for me is learning to trust myself. I don't need you managing me anymore." Her voice turned sharp, the warmth evaporating. "You'll regret this attitude, Claire. Don't forget where you came from." But I already had. Meanwhile, my father tried a different tactic. He showed up at my office unannounced, striding in like he owned the place. "Claire," he said curtly, "you've made your point. But if you want real success, you'll need my help. Running a company requires discipline, structure. You don't know the first thing about managing staff." I rose from behind my desk, squaring my shoulders. "Funny you say that, Dad. Because I manage them every day. And we're growing." He looked around the modest office, sneering at the mismatched furniture and cramped space. "This is small. You'll never scale at this rate." I held his gaze. "Small, maybe, but it's mine. Every inch of it earned. And I'd rather build slow and steady than sit on top of money I didn't earn, controlling people who don't deserve it." For once, he had no retort. Still, the encounters left me rattled. After they left, I sat in my office, staring at the city's skyline through the window. Part of me was exhausted. Why couldn't they just accept me? Why did every interaction feel like a war for respect? But another part of me was energized. Because every insult, every doubt, every attempt to drag me back under their thumb was proof of one thing. I was free. And they hated it. The next blow came at a family gathering. It was my cousin's engagement party, and I knew my parents would be there. Still, I went because I refused to keep shrinking away. As expected, the whispers started the moment I walked in. Aunts and uncles exchanged knowing looks. My mother floated between groups, her voice carrying, "Claire has some little business now. She's trying her best, bless her heart." I smiled tightly, choosing not to react. But when my cousin's fiancé congratulated me on landing the clothing brand contract, loud enough for the room to hear, I caught the flicker of annoyance on my mother's face. And when my father muttered, "Anyone can sign one lucky deal," I finally turned. "Maybe," I said evenly, holding his gaze. "But luck doesn't pay rent. Hard work does." The room went quiet. My parents stiffened. And for once, I didn't feel small under their scrutiny. I felt tall. Back in my office, my assistant noticed the change in me. "You're different," she said one morning as we prepared for a client meeting. "More confident." I smiled. Maybe because, for the first time, I'm not proving myself to them. I'm proving myself to me. She nodded, handing me the client file. "And you're doing it, Claire. You really are." Her words filled me with a warmth my parents' approval never could. By the end of that year, my company had tripled in size. We moved into a bigger office. I hired 5 more employees. Our portfolio included brands that once laughed at the idea of working with a small agency. And every step forward made me realize something important. My parents hadn't just underestimated me. They had freed me. By cutting me off, they cut the strings I didn't have the courage to sever myself. They thought I'd crumble. Instead, I grew roots. And now, standing tall in the company I built, I didn't need them to see me. Because I saw myself. Success is funny. It attracts the very people who once doubted you the loudest. By the time my company celebrated its 2nd anniversary, I had a full staff of 10, a new office twice the size of the first, and a steady stream of contracts that kept us busy around the clock. My team believed in me, my clients respected me, and for the first time in my life, I respected myself. But of course, that's exactly when my parents reappeared, not as skeptics but as opportunists. It started small. My mother called one afternoon, her voice syrupy sweet. "Claire, darling, I was thinking you should come with us to the country club this weekend. Lots of people there would love to hear about your business. You never know, you might find investors." I almost laughed. Investors? After all her disdain, now she wanted to parade me around like some trophy? "Thanks, Mom," I said evenly. "But I don't need investors. We're profitable already." Her tone faltered. "Profitable? You mean you're not just scraping by?"
"No, Mom."
"We're doing well. Very well." I could practically hear her swallowing her pride through the phone. "Well, that's wonderful, dear. We're proud of you. The words felt hollow, like she was trying them on for size. Then my father showed up at my office again. This time, he didn't sneer at the space. He walked in with a forced smile, shaking my assistant's hand like he was meeting a business associate. "Claire," he said warmly, "I've been thinking. You're building something impressive here. Maybe we could talk about a partnership. My dealerships could use stronger marketing." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. The same man who once mocked my fantasies was now asking to be my client. "Are you sure, Dad?" I asked. "I wouldn't want you to waste time on a pipe dream." His smile wavered. "That was then. Things change." "No," I said quietly. "I changed. You just didn't believe I could." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he cleared his throat and muttered something about calling me later. It wasn't just my parents. Slowly, relatives who had once sided with them began circling back. My aunt, who used to roll her eyes at my startup, suddenly wanted me to look over her catering company's branding. A cousin who mocked my ramen dinners in the early days asked for a job recommendation. And I realized something. The more successful I became, the more they wanted a piece of it. But unlike the old Claire, I didn't confuse attention with love. Still, my parents didn't give up. At Thanksgiving that year, they tried a new tactic: public flattery. "This is our Claire," my mother said loudly, patting my shoulder as the family gathered around the dining table. "She runs her own company. CEO and everything. We're so proud." I almost choked on my wine. Proud? After years of dismissing me. Suddenly they were proud? But before I could respond, my cousin Jenna leaned over and whispered, "Funny how they cut you off and now brag about you like it was their idea." I smiled tightly. Funny, isn't it? Later that night, my father pulled me aside. "You've really surprised us, Claire," he admitted. "But let me give you some advice. Expansion is risky. If you're not careful, you'll lose everything. Why don't you let me oversee your finances? I've got decades of experience." I stared at him, stunned by the audacity. The same man who left me with nothing now wanted control of what I'd built. "Dad," I said slowly, "you don't get to cut me off and then manage my success. That's not how this works." His eyes hardened. "Don't be arrogant. You think you've made it, but one mistake and it all falls apart." I straightened my shoulders. "Maybe. But if I fall, I'll get back up. Because it'll be my fall, my lessons, not yours." He didn't like that answer. He never called it advice again. The cracks in their control were showing, and they knew it. For so long, my parents had defined my worth by their money. They believed that without their financial support, I'd collapse. And maybe, in those first few months, I almost did. But surviving without them gave me a kind of freedom I'd never had before. And now, every time they tried to reclaim influence, through flattery, through offers, through guilt, it only proved how powerless they'd become. One evening, as I locked up the office, my assistant caught up to me. "You okay?" she asked. I sighed. "Just my parents. They keep trying to step back in, but only now that they see I've succeeded." She gave me a knowing look. "That's not about you. That's about them. You proved them wrong, and it scares them." Her words stuck with me, because deep down, I knew she was right. For the first time, my parents were realizing they couldn't control me anymore. And control was all they ever wanted. That realization gave me something I'd never felt before with them: leverage. When my father called the following week, asking again if I'd consider helping with dealership marketing, I said no. Flat out. "Why not?" he demanded. "Because," I said simply, "I choose my clients. And I don't choose people who don't respect me." He sputtered, furious. "You can't just—" "Yes, I can," I said, cutting him off. "Because I'm not your dependent anymore. I'm not a child begging for allowance. I'm the CEO of my own company. And I don't owe you anything." I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the city lights outside my window. I thought about everything I'd lost when they cut me off: security, comfort, the illusion of love. But I also thought about everything I'd gained: independence, resilience, pride. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, the day my parents cut me off was the best day of my life. Because it was the day I started living for myself. If there's one thing I learned about my parents, it's that they never gave up control easily. Money had always been their weapon, and when that failed, they turned to the next sharpest tool in their arsenal: guilt. It began with my mother. She called one night, her voice trembling in that way she used when she wanted sympathy. "Claire, you don't call anymore. You don't come by. Your father, and I feel like we've lost our daughter." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "Mom, you didn't lose me. You pushed me away when you cut me off." "That was different," she insisted quickly. "We were trying to help you. But now it feels like you don't care about us." There it was, the manipulation. She wasn't asking to rebuild a relationship. She was laying the blame on me. "Mom," I said, steadying my voice, I do care. But caring doesn't mean letting you control me again. You can't have it both ways." Her silence told me she didn't like that answer. Then came the family angle. At my cousin Jenna's bridal shower, I could feel the whispers before I even walked in. Aunts glancing at me, lowering their voices. My mother had gotten there first. Sure enough, when I sat down, Aunt Carol leaned over. "Claire, sweetheart, your mother says you've become distant. She's worried about you." I took a long sip of my tea, fighting back a bitter laugh. Distant? Or independent? Carol frowned. "Family is all we have in the end. Don't let success change that." I smiled tightly. Funny how no one said that when my parents cut me off. Back then, it was just tough love, remember? Her face flushed, and she looked away. For once, the guilt didn't land on me. But my father's tactic was worse. One evening, he called, his voice cold and deliberate. "Claire, I've tolerated your independence. But your behavior is making us look bad. People at the club are talking." I blinked, stunned. "Talking? About what?" "About you," he snapped. "That you run some scrappy little business and think you don't need us. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is for your parents when their daughter acts above her station?" My blood boiled. Above my station? Dad, my station is the one I built. With no help from you. You cut me off, remember? Whatever I have now, it's mine. That attitude, he spat, will ruin you. "No, Dad," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "It's what saved me." And I hung up. That was the night I realized something important. My parents didn't just want me to need them financially. They needed me to need them emotionally. They thrived on the image of me as dependent, helpless, unfinished without their approval. But every time I stood up for myself, every time I refused to bend, I wasn't just building a business. I was tearing down their illusion. Still, their desperation grew. They started showing up at my events, open houses, client mixers, even a small networking night I hosted. My mother would glide through the room, smiling too widely, introducing herself as Claire's biggest supporter. I wanted to scream. Supporter? She hadn't lifted a finger when I was eating ramen in a one-bedroom apartment, praying my laptop wouldn't crash before a deadline. But in front of my staff and clients, I held my composure. Because I knew something they didn't. Appearances were their obsession, not mine. And their presence, awkward as it was, only highlighted how far the balance had shifted. The breaking point came at Christmas. We were at my parents' house, the decorations gleaming like something out of a magazine. My father poured himself a glass of scotch, my mother fluttered about in her red silk dress, and I sat quietly, watching the charade. Halfway through dinner, my father cleared his throat. "Claire," he said smoothly, "your mother and I have been talking. We'd like to invest in your company, give you the resources to really expand." My fork froze midair. "Invest? You want a stake in my company?" "Of course," he said, as though it were obvious. "We're family. It's only natural." I set my fork down carefully. "No." The word hung in the air. My mother's eyes widened. "No?" "But Claire, this is what you've always wanted, isn't it? Our support." I met her gaze. "No. What I always wanted was your respect. And now I see the difference." Their faces fell, the shock raw and unfiltered. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. That night, driving home, I thought about everything that had led me here. The nights of fear and hunger, the humiliations, the endless doubts. And then I thought about the look on my parents' faces when I told them no. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't revenge. It was power. The power to say no. The power to choose. The power to finally live without their leash. The thing about power is, once you realize you have it, you stop chasing it in the wrong places. For most of my life, my parents' approval was the finish line I could never cross. No matter what I did, good grades, internships, volunteer work, it was never enough. They always held the yardstick higher, dangling respect just out of reach. But now, with my company thriving and my independence secured, I was finally learning what it felt like to stop chasing. And, ironically, that's when my parents started stumbling. It happened at the Chamber of Commerce Gala. My company had been invited because of the clothing brand campaign we'd run earlier in the year. It was our biggest contract to date, and word had gotten around about our results. I was nervous, excited, and proud. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers, the air humming with business chatter, and the clink of glasses. My staff and I had a small table near the stage, and I was preparing my speech notes for an award we were receiving when I saw them. My parents. They stood by the entrance, my father in a tuxedo, my mother draped in emerald silk. They looked around the room with the air of people who belonged everywhere. But as their eyes landed on me at the CEO's table, something flickered, hesitation. For once, they weren't the hosts of the story. I was. When my name was announced as the recipient of the Rising Business Leader Award, the applause washed over me like a tide. My staff clapped wildly, cheering my name. I walked to the stage, heels clicking on marble, heart pounding in my chest. Standing at the podium, I looked out at the sea of faces. And there they were, front and center, my parents, watching. I want to dedicate this award, I began, to every small business owner who believed in me when no one else did. To the bakery that trusted me with their brand, to the florist who gave me a shot, to the clothing line that took a chance on my vision. You're the reason I stand here today. I didn't say to my parents. I didn't need to, because the silence in their eyes said it all. After the speech, people swarmed me, congratulations, business cards, offers to collaborate. My parents lingered on the edge, and when the crowd finally thinned, they approached. Claire, my father said stiffly, that was impressive. My mother smiled, brittle but trying. Yes, dear.
You spoke so well.
We always knew you had potential. I turned, facing them fully.
No.
You didn't. They blinked, caught off guard. You cut me off because you thought I'd fail, I said calmly. You told me I wasn't cut out for leadership. You mocked me for dreaming. Don't rewrite the story now. My father bristled. We were trying to toughen you up? No, I interrupted, my voice sharp. You were trying to control me, but you failed. And now you want to stand here and act like this was part of your plan. My mother's face flushed red. Claire, people are watching. Good, I said, straightening my shoulders. Let them watch. And I walked away, leaving them standing in the middle of the ballroom, stripped of their usual power. The fallout was immediate. Relatives who once parroted my parents' narrative started reaching out, not to them, but to me. Congratulations flooded my inbox. My aunt, who once said my business was a hobby, now wanted advice for her salon. Even my cousin who used to laugh at my one-bedroom apartment sent me a message. You proved all of us wrong.
Respect.
And I realized something profound. My parents had always controlled the narrative because they controlled the money. But the moment I built something of my own, their version of the story collapsed. They weren't the heroes anymore. They were the ones who underestimated me. A week later, I got a call from my father. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard. Claire, he said, I may have been too hard on you. Your mother and I didn't expect this. We didn't expect you to succeed. The words were meant to sound like an apology, but they landed like an admission of guilt. I know, I said softly. You didn't expect me to succeed because you never really saw me. But that's okay. I see myself now. There was a long pause. Maybe we could start over? I thought about it, really thought about it. And maybe someday I'd be open to rebuilding. But only on my terms. Maybe, I said. But not if starting over means me shrinking to fit your expectations again.
He didn't respond.
And for once, the silence felt like victory. Meanwhile, my company kept growing. We signed 2 new clients within a month of the gala. My team expanded again, and I moved into a larger office with glass walls and a skyline view. One afternoon, as I stood at the window overlooking the city, my assistant walked in with a smile. "CEO," she said, her voice warm with pride, "your 3 o'clock is here." That word still hit me like a lightning bolt.
CEO.
Not daughter. Not dependent. Not disappointment.
CEO.
And no matter what my parents thought, nothing could take that away from me. That night, as I sat at my desk finishing contracts, I thought back to the girl I used to be, the one who thought her parents' love depended on their money. And I wanted to reach back through time and tell her, one day, they'll see you for who you are. But by then,
You won't need them to.
when people like my parents lose control, they don't surrender gracefully. They scramble, reaching for whatever scraps of influence they think they can salvage. And by the time my company reached its 3rd year, my parents were scrambling. It began with invitations. A box of monogrammed stationery arrived at my office, formal invites to charity galas, luncheons, and country club dinners. All signed in my mother's flawless cursive. "We'd love for you to attend as our guest of honor," one note read. "It will reflect beautifully on the family." The family. Not on me, not on my business, on them. I set the stack of invitations aside, unopened after the first, and told my assistant to politely decline. "Are you sure?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "These are big-name events." I smiled faintly. They want me to show up as their accessory. I'm done being anyone's accessory. She nodded, understanding. Then came the offers. My father called one afternoon, his tone unusually soft. "Claire, I've been thinking my dealerships need a fresh marketing strategy. I'd like to hire your firm, pay you properly, put everything behind us." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the skyline. This was the same man who once told me I wasn't cut out for leadership. The same man who cut me off without warning. And now he wanted to sign a contract with me? Part of me wanted to gloat, to throw his words back at him. But instead, I asked calmly, "Dad, why now? Why not when I was starting? Why not when I begged for just a little faith?" He was silent for a moment before muttering, "Because we didn't think you'd make it." There it was, the truth, raw and unfiltered. "Well," I said quietly, "you were wrong. And I don't take on clients who don't respect me. So the answer is no." I hung up before he could respond. And for once, I didn't feel small or guilty. I felt powerful. But they weren't finished. At Easter, my parents staged their boldest attempt yet. The family had gathered at my aunt's house, the dining room buzzing with chatter and the smell of roasted ham. I sat with Jenna, laughing about old times, when my mother clinked her glass to get everyone's attention. "Family," she said brightly. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge our Claire. She's built a wonderful company, and we couldn't be prouder. In fact, Richard and I are thrilled to announce that she'll be partnering with us to expand into new ventures." The room erupted in polite applause. My fork froze midair. Partnering? That was news to me. All eyes turned to me expectantly. My parents beamed as if they'd just presented me with a crown. I set my fork down slowly, rising from my chair. My hazel eyes swept the room before landing squarely on my parents. "That's not true," I said clearly. "I am not partnering with anyone, least of all the people who doubted me every step of the way." Gasps rippled through the room. My father's face turned crimson. "Claire, don't embarrass us." "No," I cut in. "You don't get to use my success as your shield. You cut me off when I needed you most. You told me I was chasing fantasies. And now that I've proved you wrong, you want to rewrite history?"
I won't let you.
The room fell silent. My mother's hand trembled around her glass. My father opened his mouth, but no words came. And in that silence, I knew I had just taken back the story completely. Driving home that night, Jenna texted me. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen. You stood up to them in front of everyone. They can't spin it now." I smiled at the screen, tears pricking my eyes. Because she was right. For years, my parents' power came from controlling the narrative. But now, in front of the whole family, I had shattered their version. I wasn't the dependent daughter anymore. I wasn't the failure. I was the CEO. The weeks that followed were strangely quiet. No more invitations. No more calls. No more surprise appearances at my office. For the first time, I had space, real, honest space to breathe. And in that space, I realized something important.
I didn't need them to change.
I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't even need them to respect me, because I respected myself. One Friday evening, after my team left for the weekend, I stood alone in the office, gazing out at the city lights. My assistant had left a note on my desk before she went home. "Proud to work for you, CEO." I picked it up, smiling through tears. And for the first time, I felt the weight of everything I had built. Not just a business,
Not just an office.
but a life. A life that was mine. By the time summer rolled around, something had shifted permanently. My parents no longer called, no longer invited, no longer barged into my life with their demands. At first, I thought it was another tactic, silence as punishment. But then I realized it was something else entirely. For the first time in their lives, my parents didn't have power over me. And without power, they didn't know how to exist in my world. The final reckoning came at a wedding. My cousin Jenna finally married, and the entire extended family gathered in a sunlit ballroom. I knew my parents would be there, and for once, I wasn't anxious. I walked in with my head high, my staff texting me congratulations for another big contract we'd just landed. As I made my way to my table, I felt eyes on me. Curious, respectful, even admiring. My company's name had started appearing in local business magazines, and people knew who I was. But what struck me most was how my parents sat at their table. Quieter, smaller, watching me the way people watch something they can't quite understand. When I greeted them politely, my mother forced a smile. My father muttered a stiff hello. And that was it. No jabs. No control. For once, they didn't own the stage. I did. Later that night, Jenna pulled me aside, her wedding dress glittering under the lights. "You've changed so much, Claire," she said softly. "Not just your career.
You.
You carry yourself differently now." I smiled, because I finally know who I am, and it has nothing to do with them. She hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you." Those words, simple as they were, landed deeper than any compliment I'd ever begged for from my parents. The following week, I got one last call from my father. His voice was tired, almost hollow. "Claire," he said, "your mother and we don't understand you anymore. You don't need us. You don't listen. You don't," he trailed off. I waited, then asked gently, "Don't what, Dad?" He sighed. "Don't belong to us the way you used to." For a long moment, I just let the words hang there. Because they were true. "I'll always be your daughter," I said finally. "But I'll never belong to you again. I belong to myself." And I hung up, knowing it might be the last real conversation we ever had. That night, I sat in my office long after my team had gone home. The city glittered outside the window, alive with possibility. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who measured her worth by her parents' checkbook. The one who flinched at every insult, who begged silently for approval that never came. And then I thought about the woman I was now. A woman who built something from nothing. A woman who stood tall when everyone expected her to crumble. A woman who no longer chased love that was conditional. A woman who, when greeted as CEO, finally believed it. The truth is, my parents did me the biggest favor the day they cut me off. They thought they were clipping my wings. But all they really did was force me to learn how to fly. To anyone listening who's been doubted, dismissed, or made to feel small, let me tell you this. You don't need permission to build your life. You don't need their approval to soar. You just need the courage to believe in yourself long enough to prove them wrong. Because one day, the very people who mocked you will sit quietly in the corner, watching as you take the stage they thought you'd never reach. And when that day comes, you won't even need to say, "I told you so." They'll know. And more importantly, so will you.